So if we look at the human life cycle, I'm going to go through it and I'm going to define the terminology that is found in this. This life cycle is very common to animals in particular. Plants have a different type of life cycle that you'll learn about if you take Biology 102. So we start out with the egg and the sperm. These two types of cells are collectively called gametes. And they are said to be haploid, which means that they have half of the genetics. So think half of the chromosomes. So this means that there are no pairs of chromosomes. So we have no pairs. And we also call this 1N. So that means that there's only one copy of each chromosome. So N would equal the number of chromosomes. So in us, how many chromosomes would be present in the egg and the sperm total? We have only one copy of each chromosome. How many chromosomes are in your eggs and sperm?
23.
23. Excellent. So this would be 23 total chromosomes. So that is in humans. We oftentimes think of us as being superior to other animals, so we should have more chromosomes, but the chimpanzee actually has 24 chromosomes in their gametes. So they actually have one extra chromosome from us. So they actually have more chromosomes. And some of the plants have huge numbers of chromosomes, and even some fish have large numbers of chromosomes. Okay? So these come together and they form what is called the zygote, which was a word that they used in that video. So the zygote is another term for fertilized egg. So this zygote is going to be diploid, which means that it is going to have di means two. So it has two copies. So we're going to say that it is 2N. And we would have 46 total number, but 23 pairs. So it's really important that you note whether the question is asking how many total chromosomes or how many pairs of chromosomes does the cell have. So we now have pairs of chromosomes, and they are usually colored red and blue. And that just means that you got 23 from your mother, red, and 23 from your father, blue, right? But that means that when you produce, if you're a male, when you produce sperm, bless you, they'll all be blue. When you produce an egg, they would all be red in color. But we'll talk about what that blue and color actually represents, the blue and red color. There's a little imprint that sometimes goes on the chromosomes based upon the sex from which they come from. Okay. So they're not really red and blue. So if we look at this diagram, right, here we have the egg and the sperm. The sperm have the red chromosomes. Actually, they did that backwards. Interesting. The egg has the blue, and then they come together. And so that's why you see different colored chromosomes in the zygote. Okay. So what type of cell division is going to turn us from a zygote, right, into a multicellular embryo? What type of cell division? Is it mitosis or meiosis? Mitosis. And then from that multicellular embryo, right, we're going to go through those different stages from fetus to newborn to child to adult. And then it is the adult stage that is going to produce the egg and the sperm. And that is meiosis. So meiosis is a special type of cell division that produces gametes, produces haploid cells. So that means that meiosis only occurs in the testes and the ovaries. It does not occur in skin cells or brain cells or liver cells. It only occurs there. And so it's really kind of interesting Because early on during embryonic development, special cells actually seed the ovary and the testes. That's what they call it. They call it seeding it. And those are the cells that could potentially become immortal by passing on their genes to the egg and the sperm. All the other cells are going to die when you die. So we talked about cancer as being unregulated cell division. That kind of makes a lot of sense because those cells are trying to divide and reproduce at the cost of you as an organism being able to survive and reproduce. Okay. So this is what happens during early meiosis. And so remember that we have 2 consecutive cell divisions in meiosis. So you might have that written down in your notes already, right? So we have 2 cell divisions, right? So something really interesting happens during prophase 1. So prophase 1 would just be the first phase of meiosis 1. So prophase 1, the chromosomes condense, and then the replicated chromosomes come together. So the replicated homologous chromosomes come together. And they form what is called a tetrad. So there we would have 4 arms kind of all together. They're simplifying it here, right? So this would be the 4 arms. 4, right? Okay, so tetrad means 4. And then something really interesting happens. This does not happen during mitosis, and it actually doesn't happen between the X and the Y chromosomes. It only happens between the non-sex chromosomes. And it is called crossing over. So notice that my chromosomes have crossed over, and this allows for exchange of genetic material between chromosomes. Okay. So you can actually visualize it more like if you had a blue deck of cards and you had a red deck of cards and you shuffled them. Because here they're just showing the exchange of one little piece, so that when we look at the chromosomes that arise from that, right, we can see that crossing over occurred and a piece of this chromosome got passed to the red. And so that's why there's difference in colors. Okay. Now, sometimes when this happens, because it's random, we get mistakes being made. And actually, that is the reason why we get color blindness that is caused by the X chromosome. But when we get mutations, so this can lead to mutations. So lead to mistakes, and these mistakes would be called mutations. So that would be the cost of having the shuffling occur. What do you think the benefit of having shuffling happening between the chromosomes is? Anybody want it? What is the benefit of having sex in general versus being asexual? If you're an organism. To change and adapt, but to create greater variation in the offspring. So this creates greater variation in the offspring, greater genetic variation. And that genetic variation is going to allow some to be more likely to survive than others. And so that would be natural selection and evolution. So if we look at why this does, if you notice, these are all capital letters on the blue chromosomes. So capital letter A, B, and C, and then these are all lowercase letters, right? So those are alternate forms of a gene, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But notice that if crossing over didn't occur, then A, B, and C, capital, would always be inherited together. So it'd be like, this is not quite right, but it would be like, okay, I'm going to always get red hair, freckles, and a dimple, right? So you always have red hair, freckles, and dimples linked together, right? So you would never produce a person that has no red hair, freckles, and dimples, right? So in this particular instance, if this is red hair, freckles, and dimples, then, oh, this is a person that has red hair, freckles, and no dimples, right? So by crossing over, you would get greater variation in the offspring. Does that make sense to everybody? So this only occurs in meiosis. It does not occur in mitosis, because mitosis is just creating a cloned cell. You do not want genetic variation in your cells that are regenerating in your body, but when you're producing egg and sperm, you do. And so this means that a lot of times our egg and sperm have mutations that make them not viable, makes them weaker, right? Those get selected against. And even our embryos will be spontaneously aborted if they are not strong enough to make it into a fetus, right? Okay, so that is a process of meiosis, is that crossing over, prophase 1. So if we look at an overview, I'm actually going to skip this one. Actually, I'll show you. Let me show you this one first. Okay, so notice how we can also have the chromosomes. This would be during metaphase 1. So the chromosomes are lining up in a particular order. And somebody said, well, you'd always have blue and you'd always have red together, right? But here you notice that they're lined up here. And yes, indeed, I always have the blue together and always the red together. But they line up randomly. Okay, and we'll talk about this significance as well. And so notice that they could line up in a different way, which could actually give you more genetic variation. They didn't actually show crossing over on here. So when you see chromosomes that are partially blue and partially red, those are the products of crossing over. So in comparison with mitosis, right? Remember, mitosis is just one cell division. Okay? The chromosomes line up, they separate, you produce two daughter cells that are genetically identical to the parent cell. Here we have crossing over occurring, and here you can see that they changed the color of the chromosomes right here, right? It's kind of hard to see from so far away. But then you see meiosis 2 occurring, and what you need to be particularly aware of is that the gametes that are produced have half of the genetic information than the starting cell because of those 2 consecutive cell divisions. Are there any questions about that? Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about the difference between the production of sperm and the production of eggs. So this is the idea of oogenesis versus spermatogenesis. So let's start with sperm production. So genesis just means to produce, okay? This would be spermatogenesis. This takes place in the testes. We have one diploid cell. And from this diploid cell, we produce 4 haploid cells, as would be predicted from our models. Oogenesis is different. It takes place in the ovaries. Oogenesis, we have one diploid cell, but we only produce one haploid cell. So that means that for every cell that undergoes meiosis in the ovaries, only one egg cell is produced. And you can ask, well, why is that? Why do you think that might be? What do the egg cells and the sperm cells, how do they significantly differ from each other? which one's small, which one's large, right? So these are small. In fact, they actually shed some of their cytoplasm to even become smaller, right? So their cytoplasm is like just this little bit on the outside. So this would be the nucleus. That's where the genetic material is. The haploid cell, the egg cell, is large, right? So this is my egg cell. This is my nucleus. This is my sperm. So the egg is very large, and so what we have during oogenesis is what is referred to as unequal cytokinesis. And this is where one nuclei gets all of the cytoplasm. So if I start out with one cell, this is my diploid cell in my ovary that's going to start maturing into a follicle, then this cell is going to undergo meiosis 1, and one of the cells is going to get all of the cytoplasm, and then this is a nucleus with no cytoplasm. And then this one will divide again. This is my egg cell with all the cytoplasm. This is my nucleus that has no cytoplasm. Okay. So what that means is that it is unevenly divided. Now, does anybody know what these are called? Well, actually, I'm going to show a little video that shows the nucleus is kind of like right here. So that would be like, sometimes it just stays attached to the egg. Does anybody know what those are called? These are called polar bodies. And they're probably called polar bodies because they're kind of found on the outside of the cell, kind of attached to it. They're not in the center, so they're polarized, right? Polar bodies. They're on the, like a polar, the Arctic and the Antarctic. They're on the outside, right? So that's actually how we would define biological sex. Biological sex is that the individual produces large gametes, they're female. If the individual produces small gametes, they're male. So if you were to find an organism and you can't tell whether they're male or female, you would ask what type of gamete they're producing. And some organisms can actually go from being male to female. So a lot of fish, sometimes they will start out being male, and then in their lifespan, they'll turn into a female as they get bigger, and they don't produce sperm anymore, they actually produce eggs. And that's why we define them as being male or female, is based upon their gamete size. So you could put that biological sex is determined by gamete size. Females producing the larger gametes. That's why, like in seahorses, the males get pregnant because the females deposit their big eggs into the male's pouch, and then the male actually is where development occurs, and then they actually give birth. But that's why we say it's the male that becomes pregnant in seahorses, because they're the ones that produce the smaller gametes. Okay, so I'm going to show you this short little video, or not, it's actually a clip of a video. Hopefully I can get this to work. It didn't last time. DVD. Oh, it's got to read it again. So if I can get this to play.